Welcome to the Uncommon Career Podcast, where I help you to get hired, to thrive at work, and to glorify God. Join me each week for practical strategies, career motivation, and biblical insight based on Christian values. But listen, here's the thing. If you want to put into practice what we talk about and you want to get hired and get paid, then you have to take action. You've got to join the Uncommon Career Academy, where I've laid everything out that you need for a stress-free journey to your new position. This is more than just a hiring program. This is a movement where believers are coming together for what Billy Graham said was a revival in the marketplace. You can be a part of that revival too, but only if you get engaged and you get involved. I encourage you to link arms with other faithful believers and other Christian professionals. If you want to be a part of the movement, click the link in the description and join the Uncommon Career Academy today. And let's see what God does when we come together. Now, with that said, let's get started with today's episode. Hey friends, welcome back. This is the last of 3, 4, 5 episodes where we have been talking about money. We're going to talk about the salary negotiations process and a couple of tips that are going to be really helpful for you as you go into the offer table. So one of the things that I want to bring up is just a reminder of what we've been going through over the last few episodes. In the first episode on salary, we talked about salary mindsets and how to change your mindset so that you go in just really expecting the best and preparing for no matter what happens. We also talked about the rich young ruler, and we brought up James chapter 4 verses 1 through 3, where we basically talked about, the sense of, as believers in Christ, we want to avoid focusing on personal pleasure as the end outcome for our salary and really focus more on imagining how we can share the gospel, how we can save lives, bring healing, and how we can build community through the income that we get with our work. Then we started talking about how to do the practical side, how to calculate our salary and the worth of our work, and of course, how to differentiate the worth of our work from the worth of ourselves as a human being. The fact that God created us with our unique talents, with our unique value that is inherent because we are children of God and not necessarily because we can do a certain type of work or because we can, have a certain amount of productivity. In that second episode on salary, we talked about a minimum, fair, and an ideal compensation and how we can pull different levers such as location and years of experience and the format of the work, the scope of the work, the overall package, etc., to figure out roughly what ballpark you want to be asking for when you go into negotiations. So today we are going to talk about what happens at the negotiations table and what insights you can pull from to be better prepared for that conversation. You ready? Okay, so let's get into it. My name is Patricia. For anyone who does not know me yet, if it's your first time here, welcome, my friend. We are going to have some great conversations on all things career, mindset, and faith. We literally, in the Uncommon Career, we put everything back to faith because God gave us a handbook, and that handbook is not only good on weekends, it's not only good on Sundays. Our worship and our sort of faith in God's word and in the way that God does things, and faith in God himself spans Monday through Friday as well. And that includes the bulk of our Monday through Friday time, which is our work. So wherever you are in the marketplace, know that this podcast, the Uncommon Career Podcast, is where you can get information and inspiration on how to live out that Monday through Friday work life. All right, so let's get into it. Let's get into this salary conversation. So the first step I want to start with is the fact that, I don't know if you knew this, but the published range is not always the actual range. And so sometimes it's going to be okay to ask for more than what is published if you see that the, national or local average is higher, if you recognize the value of the work that you do as having a higher value because it's unique or it's a difficult skill to come by that maybe current demand is higher than the current supply. So that happens all the time. It's similar to buying a house on the market. There are specific values, like when you look at a house, do you think, okay, that should be worth about 500,000, 700,000, about $1 million, whatever. But when you go into a recession, it changes how the housing industry fluctuates, right? When you go into a buyer's market, the price is going to be different than a seller's market. So in the same way that the market changes and has its ebbs and flows, it's the same thing with salary. If there is a position where there seems to be a lot of demand but not a lot of supply, for example, if you start to see a lot of outsourcing in a particular field over to, other countries or other states, and this particular company wants someone who's local who can work in person, then chances are, right, that salary is going to be different. All right, so coming back to the point of published versus actual range, it is okay to ask for something higher than the published range and to completely disregard it so long as you have evidence for why your pay should be higher than what is published. Now, on the flip side of that, really interesting, but the published range, and this is pretty rare, but I have experienced and I have seen when the published range is actually a range that the company cannot, or for whatever reason, will not meet the top of the hiring range. And so when you see that hiring range, I want you to focus on getting your best possible offer. But again, know that the published and the actual range are not always one and the same. So take it with a grain of salt, do your own research, identify where you should be and whether you consider their published range to be in the minimum, fair, or ideal offer for you for your own profession and for your own work value, and then go into the table with that. Okay, so the second tip that I want to leave you with is that your prior salary should, in theory, have no bearing on a new opportunity. Now, this can benefit you in one way and it can work against you in another way. So technically, your prior salary should have no bearing on a new opportunity. So if your prior salary was $30K and you're going into a position where your skill set that you learned at that $30K job was actually very valuable, and this is one of the reasons why you might take a $30K job at some point, but let's say you got a lot of very valuable skills and now you're going into a position where that position, the industry standard is twice, 3 times, 4 times as much. And this is possible. It's happened multiple times. I've made a jump similar where it's like 2, 3, 4 times my pay. And it's happened to multiple people. It is possible. So I don't want you to assume that simply because you make a certain salary now that you can only get a 10 or 15 or 20% increase. People double and triple their salary all the time. And this is especially true when you go from your first position after college into the second and third position. So don't leave money on the table. Know that your prior salary has no bearing on your new opportunity. Now, a way in which this can work, I don't want to say against you, but it can kind of work on the flip side, is that if you had a salary where you made a very nice chunk of change, then technically that doesn't quite have a bearing on your next position. If you go from one position that pays really highly to a position that doesn't pay as highly, they may say, okay, well, we know that you made 150, 200,000, however much at your prior position, but this position pays $80K. And that's what it pays. So sometimes we think that because we made a prior salary that our next position has to make more, and it really depends more or less on the salary you made previously and more on the duties of the job that you are going to take. So that's what it's really based on. Now, where it gives you a benefit is in the fact that if you're in the same industry and you've had years of experience in one position and you're moving into another position, employers always ask the question, or more often than not, they will ask the question, what was your prior salary? When that question is asked, oftentimes it is asked so that they can give you a bump so you're happy, but maybe not give you the entire salary that was earmarked for that position. And sometimes you can be very happy with a 20 or 30% bump, but you're happy until you get to that position and realize that everyone else is making, 30% more than what you're making, even with that 20, 30% bump. So know that prior salary has no bearing on your new opportunity, but you still have to do your own research and you still want to make sure and go into the salary negotiations conversation with a knowledge of what your peers are going to be making, which is a completely separate number than what you were making previously. All right, so tip number 3 is that the salary is based on the duties and on the scope of the position. So that kind of goes hand in hand with tip 2. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. All right, number 4. I want you to assume that you're never going to get beyond a 2, 3, 4 max, absolute max 5% raise at any company. This is the norm. It is almost unheard of that you start at a company, and whether or not that company makes all the promises in the world, it is relatively unheard of for a company to give you a salary bump that is larger than 2, 3, 4, 5%, that is larger than the quote unquote cost of living, even though cost of living is well above 3% right now. But still, I'm going to give you a little bit of an example. This is a story from my own life. So we are going to sort of erase the names. We're not going to share any names or names of institutions. But I was once at a position and I knew that I was getting paid way too little for the work that I was doing. I knew the value of my work. I knew the experience that it took. I knew how much the position had grown. And so I went to my manager. At that point, it happened to be a dean. I went to my manager and I said, I love working here. I love working here. And at the time, I didn't have the knowledge to make a formal and appropriate request for promotion. But I did pretty well not knowing how to ask for a promotion. But I just asked her, I said, I love working here. I want to continue to grow here and to have a bigger impact and to, produce more work and higher quality work and higher level work. And right now, I believe that with all of the ways that the company has grown or the company that the department has grown and that my responsibilities have grown, I would like to have a conversation. I would like to open up the table for a conversation on a salary increase. This person said, very straight-faced, let me know when you have an interview. I hope that you're encouraged by this week's episode. In order to continue the work, I need your help. A free, fast, and really easy way to support me and the Uncommon Career podcast is to rate and review. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you can even do it now while you're listening. You ready? Okay, grab your phone and head to the Uncommon Career Podcast show page. You're going to scroll down and below the list of episodes, you just tap the 5-star rating. If you have just one more minute, then please also tap write a review and let me and others know which episode or topic impacted you the most. It means the world to me to hear from you, and it also helps others to see that this work is making an impact. Rate and review today and help us move the message forward. So then I, very straight-faced, said, by then it will be too late. So then I went off. I started looking for positions because that was a telltale sign that my work was not appreciated, but that level of work that I was doing was still being expected. And I don't think this is true of all places. I actually know this is not true of all employers, but that response was very telling. And I say that because sometimes we think that that's a normal response, and it might be a normal, a common response, but it is not an appropriate response. At least having a conversation and saying why it's not in the budget or why, like something, right? Having some sort of consideration. But getting that response as an employee made me feel like my time is done here. And so at that point, I thought, I'm going to get an interview and I'm not going to entertain the conversation. There's no reason to entertain that conversation. So I continued on to look for positions. There's a whole God story behind that. God really showed up and kind of gave me some opportunities to move forward on. And, I really prayed about it because, I kind of got, and you could probably tell in my voice now, I got a little upset, like, And so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't, even though I felt like, okay, it's okay that I'm upset because I have feelings, I'm a human. But at the same time, I was like, I don't want to make a major move, like leave this job out of spite or out of anger, out of some sort of revenge or something. And so I just prayed about it and I just felt peace about it. But I I did. I got an interview and I was going to be offered a position. No, that's what it was. I started interviewing, but I didn't have a position yet. And I put in my notice, and my manager at the time was trying to have conversations to say, hey, we'll keep you on board. We'll offer you this. We'll offer you this, like all these promises so that I wouldn't leave that position. But by then I had realized you're not going to get a raise. That's just not how companies work. And now, having spoken to so many people, who are working on their careers and making leaps and bounds and changing positions and changing careers and changing companies and staying and all of this, I have gotten to know that it is true. You don't ever get beyond a 2 or 3 or 4% raise at a company. No matter what promises are made at the beginning, nothing is in writing. So unless you get it in writing, there is no indication that you will be getting a bigger raise. So all of that, my big to-do story and conversation and everything is just to let you know that you want to evaluate the salary as it is offered in writing only. You don't want to accept an offer based off of benefits in the future or salary raises or promises or positions in the future. I actually just had a podcast episode with awesome man of God, with Paul. And so check that one out. I think it was the last weekend in December that episode came out. And, Paul had gone into a position where he was, promised this specific role and this great opportunity to learn and to grow and all these promises that never came to pass. And so this is just another example of how you've got to make a decision based off only what is in writing. Okay, moving on from that one. The 5th tip is to evaluate the package as a whole. So while we're not including anything verbal in our consideration for whether or not this is a minimum, an ideal, or a minimum, a fair, or an ideal offer, we do want to evaluate the entire package. So oftentimes, you'll have things like medical benefits, right? Insurance is really expensive. So if you have a great insurance program versus an awful insurance program, that's going to make a difference. So for example, some insurance programs are really good. One of my prior institutions had an amazing insurance program where we paid pretty much nothing to go to the doctor, to go to a specialist. We paid, no matter what, we can go to a dentist, a doctor, an ophthalmologist, like anybody. And it was like free. And I got spoiled because then at a future company, both my husband and I were looking at, other employment, and the future company for both of us were these plans that are like $100, we pay like $100, which sounds totally reasonable. But when you look at what the plan covers, it really doesn't cover anything. It's got really high deductibles where you have to pay like $10,000 in medical expenses in 1 year before that will even kick in. And then it won't even pay everything. It'll pay 50% of all your medical bills, right? So the differences in what your insurance covers are huge. So if you're someone who's relatively healthy, this might not be as big of a deal, but definitely look into it, because when something happens, one medical event can turn your entire life upside down. And so I want you to be prepared that if you are accepting a less than ideal offer, you want to have things like that really good medical insurance. Or if you see that the medical insurance isn't good at all, then you want to say, okay, well, how is my salary offer going to compensate for that? Again, the entire time remembering that salary is based on the duties and the scope of the position, not necessarily your needs, but you want to consider all of that as a whole. Other parts of the package that you want to include when you consider the entire offer include the benefits such as, sometimes there's perks, like silly perks, right? Like a gym and a parking spot and, things like that. But there's also parts of the package like amount of time that you are able to commute from home or, not have a commute at all and work from home. Hybrid work, sick days, PTO is there, but most people don't take, the amount of PTO that is offered. Most people actually spend longer using up that PTO. So depending on, how you plan on spending that might be a different conversation. Vacation days, right? How does that get addressed? So pay attention to the entire package, including things like a sign-on bonus. A sign-on bonus is awesome, but remember that that's one-time money. So consider that, but do keep in mind that that is one-time money. Other benefits could include relocation, assistance, etc. All right, number 6. Know that it is perfectly fine for someone to make you an offer, for you to say, and you always say this, right? You always say, can I have a little bit of time to think about that? And I will give you a call back. You always say that. And ideally, you say that after a relatively long pause. So they'll offer you, and then you'll be like, quiet, silence is golden. And then eventually you say, do you think I could take a little bit of time to think about that? And it's very rare that they'll say no, but most of the time you should be able to have a moment to think about it, because otherwise it gives the employee the potential to make a rash decision, in which case later on they have someone who they just onboarded who ends up leaving. So it's not good for HR. It's not good for you. Nobody should be rushed. So take your time, get off the phone, pray about it, remove the emotional piece, get to a place where you're centered, where you're focused, and then consider the package then. But again, it's okay to go back and forth. So you consider the package, and then you think, okay, now I'm ready to make a counter offer. You can go back and say, thank you so much for the offer, and then make your counter offer. And then they might say something like, oh, unfortunately, no, we are not negotiating. You can say, okay, well, and then you present some evidence, and then they go back again. And so it is okay for them to say, no, we're not able to meet that, and you need to go back to the table again. Now, all this is a process between you and the organization. It's rare, it's very rare that a company says that they're going to take back the offer, but it's, up to your level of comfort and the, just the whole interaction, how many times you want to go back and forth. But it is perfectly fine to go back and forth at least once or twice to just advocate for yourself and be assertive as to what is a fair offer. All right, number 7, I want you to use both strategy, which is what we've been talking about, and wisdom in negotiating. Seek the Lord's guidance and His peace with every single part of the process, because our own thoughts and feelings about ourselves, about how we're treated, about how we come across. Am I going to come across too pushy? Am I going to this? Am I going to that? Maybe we have people-pleasing tendencies. I mean, guilty, I always have had this people-pleasing tendency. And so when I used to go to the negotiations table, they would tell me something and I'd be like, oh, thank you, right? I want you to use strategy and wisdom. It's easier for us to say something that's going to make the other person happy, that is going to avoid conflict. But there are instances where I really do believe that it is God's will that you advocate for yourself, that you speak up for yourself, that you learn not to, and I'm speaking to myself right now, that I learn not to sort of accept what's given to me and ask for what I should be getting for the amount of skill. I'm going to forget it now. There's a verse that's like, okay, here we go. So in 1 Timothy chapter 5, I'm going to start at verse 17, but we're going to make our way down to 18. So in verse 17, he says, let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. Verse 18, for the scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out to the grain, and the laborer deserves his wages. So basically, he's talking about the elders right now, but I think this applies to just workers, people who are working hard. They deserve their wages. And so it says, let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor. So those who do a good job be paid what their work is worth. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 15, it also says, you shall give him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he's poor and he counts on it, lest he cry against you to the Lord and you be guilty of sin. So literally, it is a sin to not give someone their due wages. And so when you go into the negotiations table, if it's someone's sin to not give you the wages that you deserve, are we not sort of bowing down to man to tell us how much our work is worth, when we really should be listening to God and saying, God, is this amount appropriate? Are you giving me guidance and peace around this amount? And I've had situations where, and I think John Bevere's book, Good or God, actually talks about this, where it's a good thing to be humble and to not ask for a lot and all of that. It's a good thing. But is that what God told you? It's a good thing for me to work hard for my money, and it's a good thing for me to, not ask for more than is appropriate. But what did God tell me? If God tells me that I need to push and negotiate for more, then I need to push and negotiate for more. Now, I know that's kind of like an individual conversation with each person, but what I'm really saying is to pay closer attention to the peace of God, the wisdom of God, the guidance that the word provides us and that wise counsel provides us, more so than the need to avoid conflict or the appearance of conflict, because folks who work in negotiations, folks who work in human resources, they're used to going back and forth. So it's actually not a big conflict. It is a normal business conversation. But some of us just aren't used to it. And so we can assume that we're going to be seen a certain way when we ask for the pay that we deserve. And so I want you to, again, use both strategy and wisdom in negotiating. All right, so you are ready to negotiate. Your mindset is everything. So if you haven't yet watched that salary mindset or listened to that salary mindset episode, then go back and listen to it. I believe it's the first or second episode of the year. Know that I love you. If you've got that salary conversation coming up, I'm praying for you, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for listening. You came to the right place if you're seeking career direction, are ready to launch your career, if you're looking to change positions, or you want to secure the best offer for your next role. And I've created some resources just for you to help you along the way. First, hear his voice with the 5 steps to God's will for your career. Second, organize your career search. I've got a career transition checklist with 7 career phases and over 30 bite-sized strategies for you to check off along the way. Or grab the Bible-based Mindset Fix. It's a collection of scripture to help you apply truth to negative thoughts so that you can get unstuck and go after your position. Finally, if you have a question that hasn't been answered, then send it in. Email me your question, and not only will I answer it, but I'll also give you a shout out on the episode as well. Again, thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.